My son never hid the fact that he was with Emily Gold when she died, so why make it seem like that's the turning point of the case? Pardon me, Gus said, baring her teeth in a tight smile. Do you have something you wanted to say to me directly? Oh, and welcome back to another episode of this. So we're going to be doing another book club series reading. I think this is like reading 14, maybe 13 or 14. I don't know. I need to look. They're all like numbered, so you know it shouldn't be confusing finding them in order. They're all numbered. This will be numbered. I'll figure it out when I upload this. Anyways, so we're going to be doing another reading from our book, The Pact, today by Jodi Picoult. And I'm going to try to pay attention to like how close and how far away I am from the camera, because last time I was way too close and it was ridiculous. Like you couldn't even see my mouth moving. So really don't want to do that again. Also, side note, can you see my I Care Sometimes pillow over here? It's kind of cut off, but like, let me see if I can. Okay, well anyways, I love you guys. Thanks for being here. I'm super excited about this reading. I'm super excited to get back into it. So let's just get started, and I'm going to stop talking now. If you don't know, so my name is Brooke, and I do a lot of different kind of videos on my channel, but right now this one is a book club series, basically where we read the book together and then talk about all the juicy gossip and the drama that happens. Every couple readings I'll do like a, oh my god, not a conversation, a discussion episode about like everything that we've read, so that way we can like all catch up and be on the same page and talk about everything that goes down and like opinions and stuff. So that's what we're doing today. If you didn't know, you're more than welcome to join. Oh my god, as I said in the last episode, I do have these all organized in a playlist on my channel. So if you go to my playlists and you go to, or you could even search the hashtag our book club series, not our book club series, I think it's just book club series. I think it's just the hashtag book club series. You can search that on my channel and they'll all come up, or you can just go to the playlist and find them that way, and just watch the whole thing through if you want, or listen to the whole story through if you want. Obviously we're not done yet, which is why we're here now. So if you're following along, I'm on page 181. It says now, and it says December of 1997. Give me just a second. I'm like parched right now. Just hold on. December 1997. So I don't know if this is like before. Okay, no, so this is after the fact. So this is like when he's in jail, like awaiting his trial and everything. Gus wondered if Chris missed making decisions. Staring down at the bright feast of fruits at the supermarket, sitting shoulder to shoulder like a rainbow of soldiers, she couldn't help comparing the serviceable russets and grays of the Grafton County Correctional Facility to the unintended beauty of the grocery store. The options were staggering. Should she pick the tangerines, the green Granny Smith apples, the smooth-cheeked tomatoes? A choice at every turn, the complete antithesis of being told to eat this, to walk here, to shower now. She reached toward the clementines. They were Chris's favorite, and she would have loved to bring him some the following Tuesday. But was that allowed? She imagined one of those burly blue-suited men splitting the fruit into sections to check for razor blades, much as Gus herself had mashed Chris's Halloween candy when he was a child, looking for pins. Except she had been searching out of love. The officers would be searching out of duty. Gus opened the bag and spilled the clementines back onto their pile. Can you believe it? In that household? Gus turned around, pushing her cart toward the array of lettuce. But all she saw were several Bainbridge biddies doing their weekly shopping. Well, I believe it. I saw the boy once, and he was... Did you know the father won some medical honor? Gus clenched her hands on the grip of the shopping cart. Steeling herself, she wheeled toward the women who'd busied themselves sniffing melons. Pardon me, Gus said, baring her teeth in a tight smile. Do you have something you wanted to say to me directly? Get 'em, bitch! Get 'em! Call those bitches out. Okay, sorry. Oh no, one of the women said, shaking her head. Well, I would, her companion announced. I think when a child that young commits a crime as horrible as this one, you have to lay the blame at the feet of the parents. After all, he'd have to learn that behavior somewhere. Unless he's just a bad seed, the first woman murmured. Gus gaped at them. Do you mind telling me, she said softly, why this is any of your concern? When it happens in our town, it becomes our problem. Come along, Anne, the second woman said, and they sailed into an adjoining aisle. With high color spotting her cheeks, Gus left her partially filled shopping cart and headed out of the store. It was only because she had to jostle past a mother with twins at the checkout that she even noticed the newspapers on the stand, folded to reveal its headline banner. Come on, an ad? Really? An ad right now? Of all the times? Sorry. Okay. Where were we? It was only because she had to jostle past a mother with twins at the checkout that she even noticed the newspapers on the stand, folded to reveal its headline banner. The Grafton County Gazette screamed, Murder in a Small Town, Part 2. And in much smaller print, evidence mounts against high school scholar athlete jailed for killing girlfriend. Gus focused on the headline again. Part 2, it said. What had happened to Part 1? The Hearts received the Grafton County Gazette. Most people in the area did. As hokey as it was, with its lead stories about dairy farm silos that burned down and school budget impasses, it also was the one paper that covered the town of Bainbridge. A good number of households got the Boston Globe, too. Households got the Boston Globe, too, but only to compare the crime statistics and political posturing and basically remind them how idyllic their lives were in New Hampshire. On nights they were too busy to crack open the Globe, the Gazette, a maximum of 32 pages, was something they had time to read. The only time Gus could remember not reading the paper, in fact, were those days surrounding the arrangement, when she had been so sick at heart that she could barely function in her own world, much less read about the one around her. Gus took several deep breaths and read the article. Then she flipped to the masthead, found what she was looking for, and rolled the newspaper up beneath her arm. So what if they found proof that Chris had been at the carousel? There had never been any question that he was at the scene of the crime. She did not realize until she had reached her car that she'd taken the paper without paying. For a moment, she considered going back in to leave 35 cents. Then she decided against it. Fuck it, she thought. Let them think the whole family is full of felons. The offices of the Grafton County Gazette were almost as somber as the jail. A pleasant thought which gave Gus the impetus to march up to the receptionist with two-toned hair and demand to see Simon Favor, editor-in-chief. I'm sorry, the receptionist predictably said. Mr. Favor is in trouble, Gus finished for her, and pushed through the doors that led to the editorial offices. Gus is not putting up with nobody's shit. Get him, Gus. Get him. Okay. Green computer screens rolled and beeped in the background. In the background was the sound of a printer. Excuse me, Gus said, addressing a woman who was sitting at one of the desks, bent over a string of negatives with a loop. Could you tell me where Mr. Favor is? That way, the woman said, pointing to a door at the far end of the room. Gus nodded and crossed toward it, knocking once and then swinging open the door to find a smallish man with a telephone tucked to his ear. I don't care, he said. I told you that already. All right, goodbye. He looked up at Gus and narrowed his eyes. Can I help you? I doubt it, Gus said crisply. She slapped her copy of the Gazette down on his desk so that the offensive headline was clear. I want to know when newspapers started printing fiction. Favor made a sound at the back of his throat and twisted the paper so that he could read it right side up. And you are? Gus Hart, she said, the mother of the boy who is accused of alleged murder. Favor pointed to a word. We say it's an alleged crime right here, he said. I don't understand. No, you couldn't, Gus cut in. You couldn't because you don't have a son who's innocent, but who has to sit in a jail for 9 months until he has a chance to prove it. You couldn't because you let a reporter take a piece of information from the police for the shock value. My son never hid the fact that he was with Emily Gold when she died, so why make it seem like that's the turning point of the case? Because, Miss Hart, Favor said, it's a good hook, and there aren't a hell of a lot of those in our neck of the woods. That's exploitation, she said. I could sue you. You could, the editor-in-chief said, but I think you are paying enough for your legal bills right now. He stared at her until she looked away. Of course, we'd be willing to hear your side of the story. As you are probably aware, the girl's mother gave Lou an exclusive. He'd be happy to do an interview with you as well. Absolutely not, Gus said. Why should I have to make explanations for what happened when Chris did nothing wrong? Favor blinked once. You tell me, he said. Look, Gus said, my son is innocent. He loved that girl. I loved that girl. There's your truth. She smacked her palm down on the newspaper. I want a retraction printed. Favor laughed. Of the story? Of the tone. Something which says more clearly than this garbage that Christopher Hart is not guilty until he's convicted in a court of law. Fine, Favor agreed. He'd given in too easily. Fine? Fine, Favor repeated. But it won't make any difference. Gus crossed her arms over her chest. Why not? Because the public's already got wind of this, the editor said. It might even be picked up on the AP. He crumpled up the newspaper into a ball and tossed it into the trash. I could say your boy sprouted angel wings and flew to heaven, Miss Hart. That could even be the truth. But if people have already sunk their teeth into the story, they're not going to let it go. Next section. Selena walked into Jordan's house, slipped off her coat, and stretched out on the couch. Thomas, who'd heard the door, came running out of his bedroom. I don't know who Selena and Thomas are, so I don't know if you guys are confused right now. I'm like, am I just having a brain fog? Because I don't remember these characters. This is new to me. So if it's new to you, then we're on the same page. Selena walked into Jordan's house, slipped off her coat, and stretched out on the couch. Thomas, who'd heard the door, came running out of his bedroom. Oh, hey, he said, what's up? Look at you, Selena said, yawning. You get more handsome every day. You gonna go out on a date with me yet? Selena laughed. I told you. Your senior prom or when you hit 6 feet, too, whichever comes first. She picked up a half-finished can of Pepsi, sniffed it, and drank, eyes scanning the mess of paperwork on the living room floor. Where's your father? Here, Jordan announced, stomping out of the bedroom in baggy pair of sweats and a Nike t-shirt. Who the hell gave you the key to my house? I did, Selena said, unruffled. Made a copy months ago. Well, by all means, Jordan said. Don't ask my permission first. Lighten up, Selena turned to Thomas. What's gotten into him? He got the discovery from the AG's office today. Thomas shook his head dolefully. He needs a soft shoulder to cry on. Oh, wait, is Thomas or Jordan the lawyer? I think, okay, maybe Jordan is the lawyer. I'm not positive on that, but whatever. Thomas shook his head dolefully. He needs a soft shoulder to cry on. I don't have soft shoulders, and I don't make a habit of getting it on with people who pay me, Selena said. I'm not paying you, Thomas pointed out. Goodbye, Thomas. Selena and Jordan cheroosed. With a laugh, Thomas went back to his room and closed the door. Selena rolled to a sitting position on the couch as Jordan sank into the piles of paper littering the floor. That bad? Jordan tapped his finger against his lips. I wouldn't necessarily say it was all bad. It just isn't categorically good. A lot of evidence could go both ways, depending on the point of view. You're going to keep him off the stand? Selena said it as a statement, knowing full well that would be Jordan's intention. Yeah. Jordan's eyes swept over Selena, reclining against the pillows with the Pepsi in her hand. I think we've got a stronger case that way. Now that Chris has volunteered the information that he had not planned to kill himself, that was his story, period. If he got up on the stand, that was what Jordan ethically would have to coach him to say. On the other hand, if he kept Chris off the stand, Jordan could say whatever the hell he wanted to get his client free. As long as Chris didn't perjure himself, Jordan could use any damn defense he liked. Say you're a juror, Jordan hypothesized. Which of these two versions are you more likely to believe? Chris, who outweighed Emily by 50 pounds, was really along for the ride that night to try to stop her from killing herself, but couldn't manage to yank the gun away from her? Or they were both going to kill themselves in this beautiful testimony to their love. Except then Emily blew her brains out, and they were all over Chris's shirt, and it wasn't so beautiful anymore, and he passed out before he could use the gun on himself. I see your point, Selena said. She gestured toward the loose piles. Where should I start? Jordan rubbed his hands over his face. I don't know. It's going to take me days to get through this. I guess, first off, try his parents. We need a flawless character witness or two. Selena reached for a piece of paper, flipped it over, a laundry ticket, and began to make a list. As Jordan buried his nose in a forensics report, Selena picked up the nearest file. The police interview with the Golds, post-mortem. Nothing unexpected from Emily Gold's mother. A lot of hysteria, a healthy dose of grief, a strict refusal that her darling girl was suicidal. Oh, that? Jordan said, glancing over. I skimmed it this afternoon. You're not going to get squat out of that woman. She gave an exclusive to the Gazette. He grimaced. Nothing like a little unbiased reporting to help speed justice along. Selena didn't answer. She had turned the page and was riveted by the second interview. Melanie Gold's a lost cause, she agreed. Then she smiled at Jordan. But Michael Gold might be her saving grace. Next section. Being a mother gives you a singular sort of vision, a prism through which you can see your child with many different faces all at once. It's the reason you can watch him shatter a ceramic lamp and still remember him as an angel, or hold him as he cries, but imagine his smile. Or watch him walk toward you, the size of a man, and see dimpled skin of an infant. Gus cleared her throat, although there was no way Chris would be able to hear her across the din of other visitors and the sizable distance. She crossed her arms and gripped her elbows, trying to pretend that the sight of her firstborn in regulation prison wear did not affect her. That the dull wash of fluorescent lights on his hair did not seem unnatural. As he came closer, she fixed a wide smile across her face, certain the strain would split her in two. Hi, she said brightly, hugging Chris as soon as the officer stepped back. How are you doing? Chris shrugged. All right, he said, considering. He began to pick at the snaps on his overwashed shirt. Not the faded jumpsuit he'd been wearing before, Gus noticed. The matching shirt and elastic waist pants looked like surgical scrubs and were short-sleeved, even in December. Aren't you cold? Not really. They keep the thermostat at 78 degrees, Chris told her. Most of the time I'm too hot. You should ask the offices to turn it down, Gus suggested, and Chris rolled his eyes. Now why, he said. Didn't I think of that? A tight silence noosed them. Yeah, they don't give a fuck about your feelings in jail. Let's see. Now why, he said, didn't I think of that? A tight silence noosed them. I saw Jordan McAfee. Oh, that's right. Okay, so he is the lawyer. I saw Jordan McAfee, Chris said, finally, and some lady who helps him with cases. Selena, Gus said. I've met her. Striking, isn't she? Chris nodded. We didn't really talk that much, he said. He looked into his lap. He told me not to tell anyone about what happened. Your case, you mean, Gus said slowly. That's not surprising. Chris agreed. But I was wondering if that included you. Well, there it was. All the normalcy Gus had worked so hard to create. To create. The smile, the embrace, the idle conversation, dissolved against the simple fact that no matter how hard she pretended, the relationship of mother to son was irrevocably altered when one of the parties was in jail. I don't know, she said, trying to keep the dialogue light. I guess it depends on what you're going to tell me. She leaned forward, whispering, Professor Plum in the library with the wrench. Startled, Chris laughed, and it was the best moment Gus had had since this whole nightmare had begun. I wasn't going to be that obvious, he said, his eyes still smiling. But I think it might hurt you all the same. She tried to ignore the chill fluting over her skin. I'm made of fairly hardy stock. You must be, Chris said. Or else where would I have gotten it from? The thought of James, with his Mayflower antecedents, fell between them like a stone. The thing is, Chris continued, I told Jordan something that I already told Dr. Feinstein, something I didn't tell you. Gus sat back, trying not to assume the worst. She smiled, encouraging him. I wasn't suicidal, Chris whispered. Not that night, and not now. The bald fact that this confession had not been, I'm guilty, had Gus grinning like an idiot. Well, that's wonderful, she said, before she had a chance to reason through it. Chris stared at her patiently, waiting for the other shoe to drop. When her eyes widened and her palm covered her mouth, he nodded. I was scared, he admitted. That's why I said what I did. And Em, well, she was going to. I was playing along to try to keep her from doing it. Gus reeled from the implications of the admission. It meant that her son was not a hair away from killing himself. Certainly, that was news for celebration. And it meant that the reason she and James had not seen suicidal tendencies in their son prior to that night was not due to their own negligence, but because there were no suicidal tendencies. It also meant that Chris, unjustly accused to begin with, was being condemned for being a hero, and that, had he turned to someone else to help save Emily, this entire horrible outcome might never have come to pass. Suddenly aware of all of the other ears around them, Gus shook her head imperceptibly. Maybe you should write all this down, she suggested, and just mail it to me. She cocked her head at the inmate beside Chris. Turning slightly, he reddened. You're right, he said. I'm glad you told me. Gus hastened to add. I can even understand why you said what you did to the authorities. But you didn't have to lie to us. Chris was silent for a moment. I didn't see it so much as lying, he said, finally. It was more like not telling all of the truth. Well, Gus said. She wiped her eyes, feeling silly for having to do it. Your father will be thrilled. He didn't understand how someone with so much going for him would want to kill himself. Chris pinned her with his gaze. It can happen, he assured her. Maybe you'd like to tell your father yourself, Gus said softly. He's in the car. He wanted to come in. No, Chris interrupted. I don't want to see him. You tell him if you want. You tell him if you want. I don't care one way or the other. You do care, Gus insisted. He's your father. When Chris shrugged, she felt her anger rise on James' behalf. He's just as much a part of you as I am, she reminded Chris. Why won't you see him when you let me visit? Why won't you see him when you let me visit? Chris traced a scar in the table. Because, he said quietly, you never expected me to be perfect. Dun dun dun. Next section. On Wednesday afternoon, one of the officers stopped on the catwalk in front of Chris and Steve's cell. Get your stuff together, guys, he said. You're getting a room with a view. Steve, who'd been reading in the upper bunk, leaned down and looked at Chris. Bounding to the floor, he gathered his belongings. Do we get to stay together upstairs? Steve asked. Far as I know, the officer said, that's the plan. They had both petitioned the classification board for a transfer to medium security, although the likelihood of actually being granted permission seemed slim after the debacle with Hector still fresh in everyone's minds. But neither Chris nor Steve was about to look a gift horse in the mouth. Chris jumped up from his own bunk and collected his toothbrush, his spare jumpsuit, a pair of shorts, and his stash of commissary food. He glanced at the pillow and blanket on his bunk, then turned to the officer. Do I need to take those? He asked. The officer shook his head, then directed them out of the catwalk, past the other maximum security cells. Some of the inmates hooted as they passed or called out questions. By the time they reached the stairwell near the control room, it was quiet again. You two have the top bunks, the officer said as they made their way upstairs. This did not come as a surprise to Chris. The less seniority you had, the worse position you got, and upper bunks were considered less desirable than lower ones. It also meant that there would be two people already in the cell he and Steve were about to enter, and like any combination of elements, it remained to be seen how they would all mix. The walls upstairs were cinder block, but painted a pale, sunny yellow. The catwalks were twice as wide, the cells a foot and a half bigger in all directions. There were 4 bunks in each cell, but there was also a large common room that connected the 2 pods, with tables and chairs and so much space that Chris felt his spine stretch and was only then aware that he'd been stunting himself. "What did I tell you?" Steve said, tossing his things onto the left upper bunk. "Nirvana." Chris nodded. Their other cellmates were not in, but their belongings were neatly arranged in boxes set squarely on the 2 lower bunks, a clear attempt to let the newcomers know their place. About 15 men were sitting in the common room, some watching the television mounted high on the wall, others fitting together pieces of the jigsaw puzzles that were stacked on top of the lockers. Chris sank down onto a plastic chair. Plenty of room for it here, unlike the narrow catwalk in maximum security. Steve sat across from him and propped his feet on the table. "What do you think?" Chris grinned. "That I'd sell my own grandmother to keep from being sent down to maximum again." Steve laughed. "Yeah, well, everything's relative." He reached on top of some lockers and pulled down 2 Milton Bradley boxes. "This is all they've got," he complained. "Someone set the Monopoly board on fire last month." Chris laughed out loud. A room full of felons, and the only games were Sorry and Risk. "What's funny?" Steve asked. Chris reached for the box in Steve's hand. "Sorry." "Nothing," Chris said. "Nothing at all." That didn't make sense. All right, hold on. Chris reached for the box in Steve's left hand. It was Sorry, the game. And then Chris responds, "Nothing." Chris said, "Nothing at all." All right. Next section. James stood up and walked toward the podium to the thunderous applause of his colleagues. Gus thought he was strikingly handsome against the burgundy walls of the dining room, holding up his plaque. "This," he said, brandishing the award, "is a tremendous honor." Bainbridge Memorial Hospital toasted one of its own every year in conjunction with the teaching staff of the nearby medical school. Ostensibly, the dinner was supposed to make the young men and women entering the medical field realize what sort of demigods they'd be joining. This year, Dr. James Hart had been chosen as the honoree for his continuing contribution to Bainbridge Memorial Hospital. Although everyone present knew that James was being feted because of his inclusion in the Best Doctors listing. Unfortunately, for the nominating committee, the event had already been planned when the small glitch regarding Dr. Hart's son had come to pass. "The good thing about this particular award," James said, "is that I've had some time to figure out what I'm supposed to say to you all. I was told something inspirational. So before I begin, perhaps I should apologize for choosing to become a surgeon instead of a minister." He waited for the polite laughter to die down. "When I was much younger, I believed that studying hard and passing a battery of exams was all I needed to become a doctor. But there is a great difference between being a practicing physician and a practiced physician. I used to think that the study of ophthalmology was all about getting to the malady. I was looking people literally right in the eye, and I wasn't necessarily seeing them. In hindsight, no pun intended, I realized how much I was missing. I urge those of you that start at the start of your careers to remember that you aren't being trained to treat afflictions, but patients." He gestured to the director of surgery. "Of course, I never would have gotten this wise without a brace of bright colleagues to spur me on, and a fabulous institution like Bainbridge in which to do it. And I'd have to thank my parents, who gave me my toy doctor's kit at age 2, my mentor, Dr. Ari Gagarin, who blessed me with everything I know, and of course, Augusta and Kate, for teaching me that if there are patients at a hospital, there has to be patients at home." He lifted his plaque again, and the room dissolved into applause. Gus clapped woodenly, a smile pasted to her face. He had forgotten to mention Chris. Intentionally? Her head was spinning. She stood up before James could even make his way back to the table and pushed her way blindly toward the ladies' room. Inside, she leaned against the sink and ran cool water over her wrists, James's words circling inside her head. I was looking people right in the eye, and I wasn't necessarily seeing them. She straightened her dress and took her handbag, intending to walk out of the bathroom and head into the lobby where she'd ask the concierge to call her a cab. James would figure it out, and maybe by the time he got home, she'd have spit enough anger out of her mouth to be able to speak to him. She yanked open the wooden door of the bathroom and almost fell on top of James. "What's the matter?" he asked. "Are you sick?" Gus tilted her head. "As a matter of fact," she said, "I am." She crossed her arms. "Do you realize you didn't mention Chris in your acceptance speech?" James had the grace to blush. "Yeah, I realized it just as I was coming off the podium, when I saw you leaving the room. I always said it was a damn good thing that I wasn't an actor because I'd forgotten someone important when I went up to get my Oscar. Because I'd forget someone important when I went up to get my Oscar." "It's not funny, James," Gus said tightly. "There you were, preaching acceptance to all of these fawning medical students, and you can't even practice that in your own backyard. You left Chris's name out on purpose. You didn't want anyone associating the little scandal with your big night." "I didn't do it intentionally, Gus," James said. "Subconsciously? Well, that's a different story. Yes, if I'm going to be truthful, I didn't want anything to ruin tonight. I'd much rather have the audience pointing at me and saying, 'Oh, that's the best ophthalmological surgeon in the Northeast,' than 'his son's on trial for murder.'" Gus felt her face heating. "Just get away from me," she said, trying to push past him. "No wonder you feel so comfortable here. These people are all like you. Not one of them mentioned Chris to me. Not one of them asked if he's all right. If we know when the trial is going to be, nothing." "That's not my fault," James pointed out. "It hits too close to home. Don't you see, Gus? I am too similar to these people. If this sort of thing can happen to me, who's to say that one day it couldn't happen to them?" Gus snorted. "Well, it has happened, James. It is happening. And no matter what you say or don't say, you can't just wish it away." She was halfway down the hall when she heard her husband's voice, so soft that she might have imagined the pain stripped through it. "No," he said, "but you can't stop me from trying." Ooh, shit. So he's over here trying to wish it away. You're a fucking adult, man. Like, I don't know. I'm not crazy about... He's not my favorite character. Next section. One of the things that Selena Damascus had learned in her 10 years as a private investigator was that accidents did not just happen. From time to time, they were carefully plotted, calculated, and arranged to one's advantage, all, of course, under the cloak of happenstance. She would tell anyone who asked that there was no magic to being an investigator. It required only common sense and an ability to get people to talk. To that end, however, she had developed a repertoire of skills designed to get her as much information as quickly as possible. She was not above using her looks, her body, or her brain to get her behind a closed door, and once she weaseled her way inside, she'd be damned if she left before she had something worthy to take home. The day she intended to meet Michael Gold, Selena woke up at 4 a.m. She dressed in jeans and a white Gap t-shirt and was waiting in her car on a Class 4 road that veered off Wood Hollow when Michael Gold's truck rambled out of his driveway shortly after 5. Of course, by that point, she already knew that Michael owned his own veterinary practice, mostly large animals. She knew that he drove a Toyota 4x4. She knew that when he stopped for coffee en route to his first call, he added milk but no sugar. Selena followed Michael's truck discreetly, an act made all the more challenging by the lack of cars on the road at this hour. When he pulled into a long driveway marked 7-Acre Farm, she drove by without glancing back. She parked a half-mile down the road and doubled back, following the sweet scent of hay and horses to a field in the distance. Having studied Michael for a few days, Selena knew that he started in the barn, greeting all of the animals and getting the lay of the land no matter what the call was for. That morning, the farrier was working as well, which was a wonderful boon since the burly man pounding horseshoes would assume she was the vet's assistant, and the vet would assume that she was the farrier's. She smiled at everyone she passed. Bloody busy here for so early in the morning, and found Michael bent over the foreleg of a sorrel mare in one of the stalls. Hearing her approach, he let the horse's leg fall to the straw. "I don't see any signs of abscess, Henry," he said, twisting to see over his shoulder. "Oh," he came to his feet, brushing off his hands and leaning against the horse. "Sorry, thought you were somebody else." Selena shook her head. "No problem. Can I help you in there?" "Everything's under control. You haven't seen Henry around, have you?" "No," she answered honestly. "If I do, though, I'll send him your way." Before he could ask any questions, she disappeared down the aisle of the barn. She studiously avoided Michael for an hour until he shook hands with a man leading a big bay out of the barn and walked toward the driveway. Then she positioned herself at the fence closest to his truck, smiling when he greeted her as she began to store away the tools of his trade. "You're Dr. Gold?" Selena asked. "Yeah," Michael said, "but only on my letterhead. My clients call me Michael." "I'd imagine your clients don't call you much of anything at all," Selena teased. Michael laughed. "Okay then, they're owners." "I wonder if you've got a minute to talk," Selena said. "Sure. Is it about one of the horses at the farm?" "To be honest," Selena said, "it's about Christopher Hart." She watched the shock leap into his expression, carefully smoothed by the creditable blankness. "Are you a reporter?" he asked finally. "I'm an investigator," Selena admitted, "working for the defense." Michael laughed. "And you actually thought I'd want to talk to you?" He pushed past her and opened the door of his truck, swinging himself inside. "I didn't think you'd want to," Selena called out, "but I thought you might need to." He unrolled the window of the door he'd already closed. "What do you mean by that?" Selena shrugged. "I've seen how you go about your work, and I can't imagine why someone who goes to such great lengths to save animal lives would intentionally ruin a human one." She paused, watching the play of emotions on his face. "That's what it would be, you know," she added softly. Michael Gold looked at her, his throat working. Selena placed a hand on his forearm. "What happened to your daughter was horrible and terribly sad. No one on our side is discounting that." "I don't think I'm the person you ought to be talking to," Michael said. "You're wrong," Selena countered. "You're exactly who I ought to be talking to. I want to ask you, Emily's father, a question. Would she have wanted Chris caught up in this circus? Would she have believed he could kill her?" Michael ran his thumbnail along the lip of the steering wheel. "Miss, Damascus. Selena Damascus." "Selena, then," he said. "How would you like a cup of coffee?" I need a break. My throat hurts. This reading has been kind of boring, but that's okay. They can't all be winners. They can't all be winners. It's still going to get posted. And I'm going to end there on page 194, if that matters. I don't think anybody actually has the book. I think you guys just listen. But either way, just in case somebody does get the book, we're ending at page 194. I'll probably do at least one more reading before I do the discussion, because that one was kind of, I mean, it wasn't lame, but like it was just, you know how like you get to a point in every book, if you read books, then you know this. There's like this point in every book where it kind of like dips and it's like not that interesting because they just kind of have to like keep the story going before the drama happens again. So anyways, I feel like we're kind of at that lull right now, which is fine, whatever. We'll get back to the drama here shortly. But yeah. That's all for today because my throat hurts. But I love you guys, and I don't really know what else to say. If you enjoyed me reading this, or if you enjoyed any of my stuff so far, subscribe, and I'll see you guys later.
How y'all feel out there?
I'm light years, call me eons. When the snare kick in, the beat is neon. Lights, yeah, I'm feeling magnificent. Care less what I'm up against.